Hi, hello, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us for another day of the Princeton Review live. We are coming at you at a very big time for those of us that are registering for the MCAT. Today was a day for Group A. If you're looking to register for a test date, you might have gotten one today. Hopefully you got the one you want. For those of us in other parts of the country, perhaps in Group B, hoping to register tomorrow. So I am super curious to know if anyone in the group here is in one of those boats. And if not, please share where you are in your MCAT journey. I want you guys to be able to let me know what kind of information you're hoping to get for so we can cater this a little bit, to whether everybody here has already taken the MCAT and you're kind of done and over with it. We don't have to talk about the MCAT. But if a bunch of you are, in fact, signed up recently, you're looking at an MCAT in your very near future, then we'll spend some more time talking about that. And so we held one of these last week in anticipation of this MCAT registration date that happened today and will happen again tomorrow. My colleague was leading that session, and I know that she invited some of the attendees to come back and answer some questions that she wasn't able to have time for. So I just want to know if any of those wonderful attendees from a week ago have showed up here, and kind of warn you that we will be covering a lot of the same content that we covered last week, but it doesn't have to be that way if you guys have a bunch of really great questions. And so I know everybody is likely at different points in their MCAT journey, but it's a fun journey. It's definitely been thrown for a loop this past year. We are, all making our adjustments. Um, okay, seems like we've got some audio feedback. Um, Let me see if that's any better. It is muted. Let me see. I can. Are we doing any better here? Okay, seems like we've got some audio feedback. Let me see if that's any better. It is muted. Let me see. Yes. Yep. Sorry, guys. 1 second. We are having just a brief technical difficulty. Okay, let's rock and roll then. So we are going to be talking about med admissions in general today. So over the past couple of decades, the number of students that have decided to enroll in med schools for MD programs, it's gone up by over 30%. And with DO programs added in, that number is something more like 50%. We'll talk about those DO programs a little bit more. But that means that there are many more people applying to med school as well. So you can extrapolate that from that to realize that kind of getting into med school, it's not just harder than it's ever been, it's significantly harder than it was 20 years ago. If you talk to a doctor who's been at it for 15 years or more, they'll be the first ones to tell you that you're going to have a harder time getting into med school than they did. I know I've talked to doctors that said that they wouldn't have as much of a chance as they did back in the day. But just because things are challenging doesn't mean it's impossible to get in. If you're prepared and if you're ready for the admissions process in its entirety, you can get yourself into medical school. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. So, how you can navigate this med school admissions process and make sure that you get into med school. And the med school that you want to get into, of course. My name's Kelsey. I'm an outreach specialist with the Princeton Review. I also teach and tutor for the MCAT. I do the CARS section. That's my kind of brainchild. I don't really do much with the sciences, so I apologize that I won't be much help for very specific science-based questions on the MCAT today. But CARS I can do all day long. I do the GRE, the SAT, ACT. I love breaking down the scariness of standardized testing. And so this is a really rewarding path for me to be on. And I hope to share some of these, trade secrets, for lack of a better term, that we have with y'all today. So thank you for coming. It's my pleasure. When we're going through this presentation, we're going to go over basically three main ideas. We're going to talk about the med school admissions landscape and how it's changed a little bit this year. We'll talk about the MCAT. And again, if we've got anyone signed up to take the MCAT coming up, we can talk more or less about that. Please feel free to comment in the chat. There's a tiny bit of a delay, but I will be able to address any comments that come through. And we'll talk about the timeline in general for the best bet to get you into the med school that you'd like to be into. So when we're done with this short session we have today, hopefully you'll have some really nice information for how to navigate the process of applying to med school to make sure you have the best chance possible of getting admitted. So let's kind of start off by laying out what the med school admissions looks like. Let's take a broad perspective and view the overall landscape of med school admissions. Um, Most of us are probably already focused on a specific medical school or program, but you need to know what admissions to all med schools looks like. Much of the application process is fairly universal from student to student and from school to school. And it starts with just one simple thing. And that's that getting into med school is hard. Like, you know that, right? You probably already realized that, but we want to make sure that you understand just how hard it is. So let's take a look at how the numbers shake out. This is from the 2019-2020 cycle. We had 873,000 applications submitted to AAMC member med schools. Those applications were sent in by 53,000 and change students. So that shakes out to about 17 applications per student. And in the end, just 21,000 students ended up actually attending medical school that year. So the numbers work out to be about 41% of applicants to med school who ended up accepted and attending medical school. There are a lot of factors in getting into medical school, but we wanted to start just by making sure that you understood how hard it is to get into any med school, right? The majority of students who apply every year, they don't end up actually attending med school that year. So if you want to know what those successful applicants all have in common, you should know that it's more than simply just a good academic record or a really high MCAT score. It's a lot more than that. You want to be a well-rounded applicant. Um, but let's take a look at these core competencies that the AAMC says need to be displayed for students matriculating into medical school. There's 15 of them across three different areas. And as you can see, only the two at the very end refer to scientific knowledge. The AAMC, they govern all medical schools, all med admissions, and the MCAT. They want well rounded students to apply. Many of these ideas are fairly abstract. If you're sitting there wondering, how can I show ethical responsibility to self and others on a med school application? We get it, we understand. But still, you need to keep in mind that you need to show plenty of abilities and skills to be a successful medical school applicant. So, lots of core competencies that you want to be able to demonstrate here. And let's take a sidetrack here and talk a little bit more about the MCAT. What you need to know for the MCAT is not some theoretical, abstract body of knowledge. AAMC very specifically lays out the prerequisite courses that you need before you sit for the MCAT. Um, and so this is, not just for doctors, not even for med students. This is before you sit for the test. So they list not only the courses, but how much of each course you need, and it's really quite a lot. You need a year of biology, physics, gen chem, organic chemistry, plus a semester of biochem, psych, and soc. And so this shakes out to be essentially what is one full year of college. So you need to know quite a lot of subject matter to do well on the MCAT. While you need to know a bunch of science to demonstrate all those core competencies, you also have to understand that they're not going to matter so much if you don't also come in with a very strong MCAT and GPA. It comes down to numbers, and that's the numbers of both your own and the number of applications that are submitted. There's this preliminary screen. Admissions committees will consider the totality of your application, not just one component, but there are too many applications for each school to be able to review thoroughly. So there's going to be a preliminary screen before any human really starts to read your essay or look at all those wonderful things that you've demonstrated. They're going to have some hard cutoffs for GPA and MCAT scores. And so if you're not within range for what they're looking for, no one is going to open up and read into your application. If your MCAT score and GPA aren't above a school's arbitrary threshold, the rest of the application, won't be reviewed. You'll receive a rejection. And honestly, the MCAT gets weighted more heavily. So a poor MCAT score will negatively affect even the best GPA. If your GPA and MCAT don't measure up, you'll be rejected without considering all those other factors that make you a well rounded applicant. And as you select schools, you can use resources like the med school admissions requirements, sometimes abbreviated as MSAR, to help select schools that generally fall into the range of GPA, the range of your GPA and your MCAT score. But you got to know that going into the process. You really need to be prepared. So let's take a look at these two charts of med school applicants. So that's everybody who submits an application, and med school matriculants, those of us who end up actually attending school. So the 53,000 applicants overall had about a 506 MCAT score the last 2 years with an average GPA of about 3.58. On the other hand, the roughly 22,000 matriculants had an average MCAT score of about a 511 and a GPA of 3.73. And one more thing you need to know about those numbers, every MCAT, every medical school, excuse me, does that initial sorting based on your MCAT scores and your GPA alone. That's just determined by a computer. So I can't emphasize this enough. You don't want to just send in an application and see what it feels like, see what happens, because you're not going to do yourself a favor if your GPA and your MCAT scores aren't within range of where that school is wanting their applicants to be. And many schools, in fact, will require you to sit out for a year. So if you apply to a school and get rejected, they will make you wait a year before you can submit another application. So you really just want to be super careful about the timing and making sure that your own numbers are within range of what a school is looking for. And there's some guidelines for what will typically pass that initial screen. The credentials for screening you need to aim for are about a 3.3 GPA and an MCAT score of about a 508 or 509. In reality, though, you should really only feel secure if you have much higher numbers than these. In addition, you're going to need some clinical experience up to maybe 100 hours across multiple disciplines. So, getting through just that preliminary screening is tough, and you need to have a lot on top of that as well. And if you don't have those credentials at this point, you might start to think about other options. If your numbers don't hit those thresholds, you might consider a DO program instead of an MD. Those have become a lot more popular, and it's really a great path for a lot of students at this point. So don't knock it. If you're not considering a DO and your credentials aren't quite within range, you should definitely consider it. Another option would be to look at schools in the Caribbean. Another path is to go off and get a master's degree in science to boost your GPA and to give you a shot at taking the MCAT again and getting those MCAT scores up. Because boosting your GPA, boosting your MCAT scores, they're just that important in med school admissions. Any questions on any of this stuff before we move on? We can take a pause here for just a second. Boosting your GPA, boosting your MCAT scores, they're just that important in med school. All right, y'all, let's keep cruising through. We are going to talk to our second piece here, which is all about the MCAT. It is impossible to overstate how important the MCAT is in med school admissions. You're not going to get into med school without a good score. And so that means you've got to understand what the MCAT is and why it plays such a big role. So we know it's an admission test, and it's a key requirement of applying to med school, but there's more to it than that. It's developed, it's overseen, it's administered by the Association of American Medical Colleges. They're the governing body for med schools in America. That means the MCAT is made by med schools with the express purpose of being the test taken for entrance into med schools. And it's not just that some schools require the MCAT and some don't. Every school in the US and Canada requires students to take the MCAT as part of their application. So everyone who wants to apply to med school will be taking the MCAT. It's also required for both Doctor of Medicine programs and Doctor of Osteopathy programs. So if you want to be any kind of doctor, the MCAT is going to be your test. It's got 4 separate sections, which all test kind of different categories of knowledge. They've all got these funky names, but really what you've got up is a biology section, followed by the verbal section, which everybody calls CARS, or the chemistry and biology comes up first, then CARS. Then we've got the biology and biochem foundations. And we see biology kind of showing up throughout. That's because biology is going to be the foundation of this test for the most part. Um, and so more than just knowing, the different kinds of knowledge that you learned in these classes in college that you had to take as prerequisites before you could even take the MCAT, you need to demonstrate your knowledge on these subjects in really specific ways. Because unfortunately, the MCAT, it's not like a Jeopardy game, right? It's not essentially trivia about college level science. Cramming for your notes isn't going to help you get a high score. The AAMC very specifically describes the scientific reasoning and inquiry skills that students need to succeed on the exam. In fact, almost all MCAT questions are phrased in some weird way that makes you use some kind of scientific reasoning or inquiry. So, using the AAMC's language, that includes the fact that you need to show knowledge of scientific concepts and principles on the MCAT. And so that doesn't mean you have to show all your knowledge, but you got to understand some concepts, of course. So, for an example, if you were to see a genetics question, you might need to use a Punnett square to get the answer to that question. But you could also probably get the right answer without totally completing that Punnett square. MCAT also requires scientific reasoning and problem solving, which sounds pretty vague, but usually this involves being given a description of scientific research with some results provided. You'll then be asked to extrapolate out to further conclusions. Another one here, the AAMC wants you to demonstrate an understanding of the reasoning about the design and execution of research. So you could be provided with a detailed explanation of scientific research, but your task is to spot the flaws in it and see if you can find the problems. And the last skill that they're looking for, we call data based and statistical reasoning. So this just means that you need to understand how to analyze charts and graphs that have statistics in them. So you can't really walk into the MCAT and think you can just knock it out of the park just by cramming from biology and organic chemistry and physics notes that you took in class. You have to demonstrate this very specific scientific knowledge in a very specific manner. And all of that is in a very long day. The test takes a total of 7 hours and 27 minutes. Your entire content time, that's the time where you're actually being tested, is going to be 6 hours and 15 minutes. That's a long test. And you're going to have to be focused for the whole time because that last section shows up after you've already been testing for more than 4 hours. But also look into the details of each section here. It's a 95-minute section for the sciences. Requires you to be focused and in the game as you're answering all 59 questions. And believe me that the MCAT is designed to make you work the whole time in order to answer every question. So that shakes out to about a minute and 36 seconds to answer each of the questions, and that time includes reading any passages or analyzing charts as well. So you're not going to be, unfortunately, answering a bunch of questions on the MCAT very quickly and moving on. You'll need to think them through, analyze lots of different information, maybe from different sources, and then get a correct answer. And you only have to do that 230 times across 4 sections over 6 hours. So to say it's brutal is not really an understatement. Some of you might have some friends who took the shorter testing date that AAMC rolled out in 2020, but that is gone. That is always designed to be a temporary fix. And so the full MCAT test day is back and here to stay. So here's those names of the sections on the MCAT again, and more importantly, the score range that you can get on each one. So each section is scored from a 118 to 132 range, and that is just 14 points of difference on each section, which basically means that each point matters. Uh, Overall, there are just 56 points to distinguish from the lowest score to the highest score. And if we take a look at that final column, you'll notice there's only a 7-point difference between the mean score and the best score on each section. But just, being above average shouldn't just be your goal if you want to get into medical school. Just to illustrate how high of a score you really need on the MCAT to be very competitive in your med school applications, let's take a look at this big chart of MCAT score percentiles. This is the complete chart of the percentile for each overall school in the MCAT, taken straight from the AAMC's website. But let's take a look at this final paired set here. The average MCAT score for med school matriculants, remember, is about a 511. A 511 is in the 85th percentile score for all MCAT takers. So, if you're seeking admission to one of those more selective programs, then you'll need to score even higher on the MCAT than that 85th percentile. And that's before you even get to work on your med school application. So this is a very competitive testing environment already before you have even looked at all those other pieces that you have to put together. Any questions on the MCAT before we pivot and talk more about the application timeline? Or if there's anybody just joining us, if you'd like to chime in on the chat with where you are in the med school application, if you're a junior, if you're a senior, or earlier on, just starting to think about where you might fit into this process, that can help me to kind of target our discussion a little bit to those of you that are here with us live. Um, but if not, let's go ahead and dive right into talking about what you need to make sure you have everything ready for med school. And that's going to be a fairly strict timeline for each year you're in college. And I do want to point out, if you're not hitting those specifications laid out in the timeline, your application isn't hopeless, but you need to know where you might be behind because then you'll know what you need to do to catch up. So let's talk about generally what all the components are. Um, so you're going to have these 12 components laid out, which are kind of a lot. And remember, the coursework includes what you did throughout college, but the work and the activities can begin earlier. Also, realize that a social media and internet search, financial information, and criminal history search means that the AAMC wants to know about you as a person. So, this is about a lot more than just filling out some questions and presenting your college transcript and MCAT score. You're going to make sure you're on track to get everything in time to meet those deadlines. And you got to begin your freshman year of college. So your first year, admittedly, there's not a lot going on in terms of preparing you for med school admission. This is just the beginning of the timeline. But even in your very first year of college, you'll need to begin these building blocks and begin, you know, putting the pieces, building the foundation. You need to begin those pre med requirements. You got to take chemistry, calculus, biology. You can also start participating in some internships, some clubs that are health focused, any other activities that will help improve your application and make you more of a well rounded student. And don't forget to keep an eye on the prize, right? The end goal here. Think about if any of your professors could be the kind of mentors who could help, help you participate in research or maybe someday write a great recommendation. So that's really what you want to be the focus of your first year as an undergraduate. Sophomore year, things should be starting to come together. You'll be through most of your prereqs. You'll also hopefully have some experience in research in some clinical settings. This is where you will probably start gaining momentum towards eventually applying to med school. So you should really begin looking at specific medical programs by the end of the year. And also, if you're strengthening some relationships with professors, that can help you to do that. You can check in with your pre health advising at your university, and they'll make sure that you're on the right track. Junior year is the year for med school admissions. You're going to be wrapping up your prereqs, as well as getting more and more settled into your research and your extracurricular profile. But your junior year is the year where you're going to get down to actually figuring out your application. That begins with actually researching the schools that are a good fit for you. This is the year you're going to prepare for, register, and finally take the MCAT as well. So you'll be getting all the big pieces started. You're going to start working on your personal statement, which is not just a significant element of your application, but it takes a significant amount of time. So if you're not starting to do that and you're a junior, then you might be falling behind. But it's not too late. We should, be breaking this down month by month. So personal statement should have already started, can get finalized into April and May, so there is still time to be able to submit your application confidently in June. Um, the average application reviewer and med school interviewer, they're only going to take away 3 to 5 things from your application, and those need to be your unique selling points and how you present them. in your personal statement, how you present your activities in your interview, that all the way it comes together is all key. So one big problem we've seen with students is ineffective personal statements. Either they're boring, or they're the wrong content, or they're not very well written. Your personal statement should be 5 to 6 paragraphs with an opening catch to get the attention of the person who's reading your application. Should be 3 to 4 paragraphs that highlight your selling points and your journey. If you're a re-applicant, how are you different now? And then a concluding paragraph that reflects the beginning, um, and a challenge, or for moving forward, basically kind of tie it all together. So you want to avoid the temptation of just writing, I want to be a doctor because, or statements about how compassionate you are. That should radiate from your experiences. Um, so you want to be able to set yourself apart and not just rely on those very common experiences. Everyone wants to help the world, everyone wants to work abroad. How are you unique? Or statements about how compassionate you are. That should radiate from your experiences. And then the end of your junior year is when you should take the MCAT. But you need to keep in mind the way that the AAMC limits MCAT registration. It's not offered throughout the year. Some of you may have had the opportunity to register for an MCAT test date yesterday, some maybe tomorrow. So that's super exciting. MCAT's only offered on these select dates. And so you need to know ahead of time what test date is going to work for you based on whether or not you've taken the right courses, how much prep you need, and when you need your score for those applications. And you need to know all that stuff really far in advance, because you can only reschedule your date or get a refund if you register within what the AAMC calls their gold zone, which is a month before a test date. AAMC also limits you to register for just one test date at a time. You can't hold reservations for more than one date. So you just have to focus on one test date at a time. Even if you're building a plan to take it more than once, you can only be registered one at a time. Um, but of course, they still don't want you testing as often as possible. These are the limits on how many times you can test. So you can take it um, 3 times in 1 year, 4 times in 2 consecutive years, or just 7 times total in your lifetime. So they've designed this test generally to be taken in the spring of a student's junior year, or perhaps the summer before their senior year. Even if you take a year or two in between college and med school, the best time to take the test is still in college, right as you've finished up all those prerequisite courses and they're still fresh. So you won't have to go back and relearn a bunch of content much later on. Those MCAT scores are going to be good for a few years. So even if you're not planning to go straight in, you still want to test while you're fresh with the content and used to taking tests. And so here we're going to give you a leg up right now in planning for the MCAT and your med school application. On our website, we have a really awesome med school management tool. It's a totally free resource that you can start using today. You can start using it right now. As you prepare for the long journey of applying to med school, we want you to be able to track everything that you need to do for your application. So, with this tool, you take control of the process. You're going to know when to conduct research, when to reach out to med schools, when to begin your MCAT prep, and to do all of those pieces within plenty of time to get your application in time. It allows you to track and manage and print all your important pre-med experiences. It'll give you access to some guidelines that are necessary to build a strong application. You can use it on both your web browser and on your phone. And so again, you can get started with this tool today. I cannot emphasize how wonderful it is at just keeping a very complicated process as streamlined as possible. And so this is just one of our many resources that you can start using now. If you haven't taken a practice test, that's a great place to start. We've got a really awesome flashcards app. We as a company, we want to help you get into med school, and these are just a few of the free ways that we're able to help. So keep in mind here, getting into med school requires you to be a very well-rounded applicant with a really broad range of competencies. But that begins with an excellent GPA and an MCAT score so that you can pass that initial screening that all med schools perform. Um, and to get that best MCAT score that you possibly can, it goes beyond just having a deep understanding of scientific knowledge, but you need to have a variety of test taking skills as well. That knowledge and those skills need to be deployed on a very specific, long, standardized test. But even if this seems like an insurmountable process, you can take it year by year, step by step. Um, I hope that you were able to take something away from this and, have some more information, some more insight into this med school admissions process. And if there's any questions, if anybody's got something in particular about their journey, any questions about how things may have changed due to COVID, I am all ears. Please feel free to type your questions in the chat. But if there aren't any, I just want to thank you all for your attention and for showing up today, and wish you all the best of luck. This is, a crazy time. My colleagues and I are always joking that the doctors that come out of this whole process are going to be the best ever, because you guys are really going through it, in order to get all of your requirements done, with all the MCAT test dates being canceled and all that jazz. So kudos to you. Thank you again and good luck. We'll be here to help any way that we can. Thank you guys so much.